Toyota's massive truck dump just erased years of resale value in a single night. 2 million pickups hit the market all at once, and the price floor gave out instantly. $50,000 evaporated from some models before sunrise. But here's the part almost nobody is acknowledging. This collapse doesn't stop with Toyota. It cascades into your trade-in, your loan, your ability to upgrade, and your financial stability for years to come. What does this wipeout mean for every truck owner? Who allowed this overload to build in the first place? And how do you protect yourself before prices fall even further? What's happening? Toyota did not announce it. They did not warn dealers, competitors, or even their own regional managers. They simply dumped 2 million pickup trucks into the American market in one breathtaking strike. No buildup, no slow release, just an overwhelming flood of inventory that hit overnight and ruptured the pricing structure that every buyer thought they understood. The moment those trucks landed, prices collapsed by $50,000 across multiple models, shattering the illusion of stability that had held the market together. Customers woke up to a landscape they did not recognize. Trucks they had considered unaffordable the day before were suddenly discounted so deeply that longtime owners felt betrayed. Videos of endless new Toyota pickups stacked in storage fields spread like wildfire. The visual shock was undeniable. This was not a sale. It was an industrial earthquake. Dealers panicked. They watched the value of their existing stock corrode in real time. Contracts they had signed based on predictable pricing suddenly looked suicidal. Buyers held back, convinced the drop was only the beginning of a much larger unraveling. Toyota's move was not a mistake. It was a calculated blow that exposed how fragile the truck market truly was. And while the public struggled to make sense of it, insiders knew. And to understand the collapse, you must first understand how the overload was engineered. Oversupply did not happen. The shock may have been sudden, but the overload was years in the making. Toyota and its rivals had been building far more trucks than the market could absorb, clinging to the belief that demand would return if they simply maintained momentum. It was not optimism, but fear. Halting production would trigger penalties with suppliers, disrupt political agreements, and signal weakness to investors. So the factories kept running, even as buyers quietly retreated. This is how oversupply becomes engineered. It starts with a single quarter of missed targets, followed by another. Then warehouses fill, dealer lots overflow, and temporary storage sites multiply across rural America. Managers raise concerns internally, but the corporate machine refuses to pivot. Instead, inventory stacks higher, like pressure behind a dam already showing cracks. By the time Toyota made its explosive dump of 2 million trucks, the system was already buckling. Dealers had been receiving allocations they never requested. Lots were so crowded that some vehicles arrived with dust on the windshield. From months spent waiting in overflow yards, consumers sensed something was off. They saw trucks sitting longer, incentives growing richer, and availability widening. The breach was obvious to anyone paying attention. Toyota did not create oversupply. They exposed it by unleashing all of it at once. And just as oversupply pushed the market to the edge, tariffs shoved it straight into chaos. If you're following this unraveling shift, make sure you like the video and subscribe so more people see what's happening. And tell us how this market shakeup is already affecting you, because your experience helps others recognize the signs before they get blindsided. Tariffs did not distort prices. The moment tariffs shifted in early 2025, the pricing logic across North America collapsed. Identical trucks carried wildly different costs depending on whether they rolled off a line in Texas, Ontario, or Sonora. A Tacoma built in Mexico could suddenly cost nearly $10,000 more than the same truck assembled one state away. Buyers looked at the numbers and immediately realized something had detonated beneath the market. This was not distortion. It was an explosion. The tariffs acted like a match, dropped onto dry brush that had been accumulating for years. Toyota's massive inventory release collided directly with these new price discrepancies, and the result was instability, unlike anything the modern truck industry had ever seen. Prices did not simply fall, they became unpredictable. Shoppers started dissecting VAN codes, researching factory origins, and comparing trim-by-trim costs with forensic precision. Social media turned into a hive of tariff investigation, with consumers exposing contradictions that made even veteran sales managers uneasy. If two trucks built mere miles apart could differ by thousands, how trustworthy was any MSRP? Dealers tried explaining the chaos away, but customers had already lost faith. They stalled purchases, waited for clarity, and watched the numbers unravel further every week. Toyota's 2 million truck tidal wave hit at the exact moment tariffs destabilized everything, turning a market dip into a full-scale pricing breakdown. The system was not bending, it was breaking. And nowhere did that break become more visible than inside the showrooms, slipping into silence. Dealerships enter the silence zone. Walk into a truck-heavy dealership today, and the first thing you notice is the absence of sound. No customers debating options, no sales staff juggling conversations, just silence. The cascade began the moment Toyota detonated the market. Buyers realized that waiting could save them tens of thousands, so they stopped showing up entirely. The silence became its own warning. As foot traffic evaporated, dealers scrambled for survival. Floor plan financing costs continued draining them daily as hundreds of trucks sat unmoved. Inventory that once represented security now felt like a weight pulling them toward insolvency. Managers reported days without a single test drive. Salespeople paced the lot like ghosts searching for anyone willing to engage. Desperation triggered a complete reconfiguration of dealership behavior. Sales teams chased departing customers into parking lots. Stickers were slashed repeatedly. Incentives grew aggressive. But none of it mattered because everyone understood the same truth. If Toyota dropped prices $50,000 overnight, what stopped them from doing it again? Consumers were not scared, they were empowered. And that empowerment created a paralysis at retail that even deep discounts could not reverse. The silence in dealerships is not a phase, it is a signal that the market has entered a new era, one where the old playbook no longer works, and the next rupture is already forming. And that rupture will only grow as the deeper structural failures move into the open. Factories begin to bleed cash. Anxiety spread through manufacturing floors as executives confronted the numbers they had hoped to outrun. The moment Toyota's glut hit the market, factory margins began to unravel, exposing how fragile their economics had become. Trucks that once delivered dependable profits now scorched balance sheets with every day they remained unsold. Production lines that had hummed for years suddenly felt like liabilities rather than assets. Inside the plants, supervisors whispered about the growing backlog. Parking lots meant for temporary storage had overflowed, forcing companies to rent distant fields and abandoned industrial yards just to corral the excess. Every idle truck represented bleeding capital, a unit built at full cost, but with no guarantee of sale. The erosion was relentless. Managers debated slowing production, yet the risks loomed large. Halting lines could trigger penalties with suppliers or invite political backlash in regions dependent on manufacturing jobs. Instead of relief, workers sensed tension rising as the system continued to corrode from within. The meltdown hit hardest in plants, responsible for high-trim models. Those trucks carried rich margins during boom years, but in the new climate, they became anchors, dragging entire divisions downward. The collapse at factory level was not merely financial. It signaled a fracture in the industry's long-term assumptions. And as factories bled cash, a new disruptor arrived to deepen the doubt clouding the entire market. The cheap EV that broke the spell. Doubt spread across the truck-buying public when a stripped-down electric pickup entered the market for under $20,000 after incentives. Until that moment, buyers had accepted inflated pricing as unavoidable, convinced that capability required cost. This single electric model unraveled that belief with ruthless clarity, forcing consumers to question the foundations of truck economics. The vehicle was not flashy, nor was it targeting luxury buyers. It offered basic range, modest towing capacity, and durable utility at a price nearly unimaginable in an era of $70,000 mainstream trucks. The simplicity is what broke the spell. It exposed how far traditional manufacturers had drifted from their core purpose. Showrooms felt the effect immediately. Shoppers invoked the electric alternative during negotiations, asking why their preferred models demanded triple the price for features they did not need. Dealers found themselves scorched by comparisons they could not counter. The psychological reset had begun. Manufacturers attempted damage control by highlighting premium trims and advanced technology, but those arguments corroded quickly. Buyers no longer accepted the premise that complexity justified towering costs. The electric disruptor had fractured the narrative that kept traditional pricing afloat. Every shopper who encountered the new model carried its implications into every other truck conversation, and as doubt turned to frustration, the deeper cultural fracture finally split open. America's pickup identity fractures. Frustration erupted across the country as working-class buyers realized they had been pushed out of the very truck market they built. For decades, pickups symbolized grit, reliability, and the pride of those who used them to build communities. By the mid-20s, those values had corroded under the weight of unnecessary luxury features and soaring prices. The fracture widened when buyers saw massage seats, holographic displays, and theatrical lighting packages attached to vehicles once meant for hauling equipment and navigating job sites. The cultural disconnect scorched loyalty. Farmers, welders, and builders felt alienated by trucks designed for executives rather than laborers. Resentment spread online as buyers shared stories of being priced out of models their families had driven for generations. Communities that once celebrated truck ownership now questioned who the trucks were truly built for. The erosion of trust went beyond economics. It was a rupture in identity. This cultural dislocation reshaped consumer behavior. Walking away from overpriced trucks became an act of principle, not simply financial caution. Buyers refused to support an industry that had abandoned their needs. The fracture marked a turning point, transforming silent frustration into vocal rejection. And as frustration solidified into resolve, consumers prepared to organize in a way the industry never expected. The spreadsheet uprising begins. Empowerment surged as consumers realized they could weaponize information the same way corporations had for years. What began as scattered posts documenting price inconsistencies soon evolved into a coordinated uprising. Online forums and social groups collected VAN origins, cross-state pricing data, incentive leaks, and dealer tactics, creating a transparent map of a system that once thrived on secrecy. Shoppers walked into dealerships armed with printouts, showing exactly how far a price could unravel before a sale became reasonable. Sales tactics that once relied on confusion now corroded under the bright light of collective knowledge. Dealers who tried to inflate numbers were confronted with evidence from buyers who knew more about regional pricing than some managers. The uprising changed negotiations entirely. Customers refused to be scorched by hidden fees or manipulated financing. They demanded clarity, parity, and accountability. For the first time in decades, the balance of power fractured away from dealerships and toward the everyday buyer. This transparency movement did more than shift the market. It rewired its psychology. Consumers no longer felt isolated against a complex system, instead unified by shared information and purpose. The spreadsheet uprising proved buyers could reclaim leverage through truth. Consumer organization reached critical mass, triggering a reckoning that threatened every pricing rule manufacturers once relied on. The 2026 pivot that terrifies automakers. Awareness spread across the industry as whispers of the 2026 pivot reached analysts and insiders. Automakers were preparing something radical, a re-engineering of the pickup truck that threatened to overturn everything consumers believed about pricing and value. For the first time in years, manufacturers planned stripped-down trucks designed around pure affordability rather than luxury margins. These redesigned models would pivot sharply away from the bloated features that had inflated prices for more than a decade. Engineers were instructed to stabilize costs at levels not seen since the early 2000s. Simplified drivetrains, modular interiors, and reconfigured electronics formed the backbone of this quiet revolution. Automakers knew that once these trucks hit the market, the value of current models would collapse instantly. Buyers who paid $70,000 for a truck today could find a similar 2026 model priced $20,000 lower with nearly identical utility. Executives feared the recalibration looming on the horizon. Every unsold truck currently sitting on a lot risked becoming obsolete inventory the moment the redesign was announced. The pivot represented more than a design shift. It signaled a systemic reckoning. The industry could no longer outrun the consequences of its own excess. It needed reinvention, and this reset would expose the vulnerability hidden beneath years of inflated demand. And as the redesign approached, Wall Street began recalculating the very survival of the business model. Wall Street recalculates survival itself. Uncertainty rippled through financial circles as analysts confronted an uncomfortable truth. The old calculus that once stabilized the automotive industry was unraveling, and investors no longer trusted the profit engine that had powered Detroit for decades. Pickup trucks had long been the cornerstone, generating the majority of earnings. Now those earnings were evaporating. Reports showed automaker stocks sliding as investors braced for impact. impact. Brokers noted that traditional valuation models could not survive a world where trucks lost value before they even left the factory floor. Wall Street recognized that the pricing structure was collapsing faster than companies could reconfigure their strategies. Institutional investors began repositioning their portfolios away from legacy automakers, shifting toward firms focused on affordability, electric platforms, and agile production. The recalibration stung. Automakers were forced to consider delaying battery plants, shelving research programs, and deferring expansion plans simply to conserve cash. The financial ground beneath them no longer felt secure. Every quarterly call became an interrogation. Investors demanded clarity on inventory levels, incentives, and production pivots. Executives offered reassurances, yet the numbers told a different story. The profit streams that once seemed permanent were destabilizing. The market no longer believed survival was guaranteed. And while Wall Street scrambled to adapt, the political arena transformed the crisis into something far more explosive. Tariffs mutate into political identity weapons. Polarization intensified as tariffs shifted from economic policy to cultural ammunition. What began as a strategy to protect domestic manufacturing soon mutated into a political weapon wielded in rallies, debates, and primetime interviews. Truck affordability became a symbol of national frustration, and voters rallied around or against the policy with equal ferocity. Campaign strategists realized that tariffs could re-engineer voter identity. Supporters framed them as patriotic tools meant to preserve jobs. Opponents argued they destabilized prices, fractured consumer trust, and widened regional inequality. Every sticker price discrepancy between two identical trucks became political capital. Communities hit hardest by rising costs, felt betrayed, and voiced their anger at town halls. Governors defended tariff policies, while local leaders begged for relief. The conversation no longer revolved around manufacturing economics. It revolved around who represented working families and who ignored their struggles. The polarization corroded party unity. Members of the same political blocs clashed publicly as truck affordability became an ideological battleground. Campaign ads weaponized footage of empty dealerships, idled plants, and families priced out of essential vehicles. The crisis had outgrown the industry and entered the bloodstream of national identity. And as politicians weaponized the fallout, workers themselves prepared for a confrontation decades in the making. Labor refuses to absorb the blow. Defiance rose across factory floors as workers faced the consequences of production cuts, shortened shifts, and postponed expansion plans. For years, labor had carried the weight of industry volatility, absorbing layoffs, overtime droughts, and benefit reductions. Now the workforce reached its breaking point. Unions demanded hour guarantees to stabilize income for families already stretched thin. Committees insisted on stronger protections against automation and more transparent production forecasts. Workers, who had once relied on continuous factory output, now saw their livelihoods reconfigured without warning. Communities surrounding major plants felt the shock immediately. Restaurants, repair shops, and small businesses that depended on factory wages watched their revenue decline. School districts braced for shrinking tax bases. The disruption spread outward in waves, proving that labor instability did not remain inside the plant walls. Strikes, once a last resort, became a credible threat. Workers refused to let the reset crush them, while executives protected shareholders. Their mobilization signaled a pivot in power. The industry could no longer treat labor as an afterthought in its recalibration. The defiance marked a turning point. Labor was no longer asking for reassurance. It was demanding structural change that aligned with a new reality. And as workers mobilized, the ripple effects would spread far beyond the factories, shaping what comes next. Households rewrite their survival playbook. Determination settled into millions of households as families realized they could no longer rely on old buying habits. The truck market had shifted beneath their feet, and survival now required calculation rather than impulse. Depreciation math, once an afterthought, became a daily conversation at kitchen tables. Families compared projected resale values, evaluated repair costs, and debated whether a truck purchased today would transfigure into a financial burden within 2 short years. Buyers began realigning their approach to timing. Some delayed purchases, choosing to wait for the 2026 reset. Others scoured regional listings, migrating from state to state in search of overlooked deals. The strategies varied, but the purpose remained the same: preserve stability in a landscape that no longer rewarded loyalty or tradition. Online communities deepened their knowledge sharing networks. Families posted calculations, charts, and negotiation tactics, transforming scattered insights into shared wisdom. Budgeting evolved into a collaborative practice where one person's breakthrough cascaded across thousands of households. This new era of consumer determination signaled a cultural shift. Families were no longer passive participants in an industry built around upselling. They became strategists, adapting faster than manufacturers who underestimated them. Their recalculated survival playbooks marked the opening move of a wider transformation. With household behavior changing, industry defenses weakened, creating a vacuum competitors stood ready to fill. Foreign rivals migrate into the power vacuum. Realization swept across the automotive world as foreign rivals identified the power vacuum left by the collapsing American truck market. Toyota, sensing opportunity in the chaos, pivoted aggressively toward affordability-first strategies. Its earlier avalanche of trucks had destabilized the market, but now it aimed to stabilize its advantage by offering consistent pricing structures and utilitarian trims designed for practical buyers. Chinese manufacturers, backed by state-driven investment and rapid production cycles, surged into export mode. Their trucks offered reliable performance at prices American companies could not match without re-engineering their entire cost structures. Startups from Asia and Europe entered the arena as well, unveiling electric and hybrid pickups that prioritized value over prestige. Their presence began cascading through fleet markets, small businesses, and ultimately suburban driveways. The competitive migration did not feel temporary. It signaled a global realignment in which American dominance was no longer guaranteed. Foreign brands recognized that U.S. consumers were hungry for transparency, simplicity, and reliability. They delivered exactly that, while domestic manufacturers struggled to pivot. As these rivals advanced, the landscape transfigured dramatically. Price expectations shifted downward, and feature sets recalibrated to meet a far more practical standard. Customers embraced the diversity of new choices that had once been unimaginable in the American market. The vacuum left by domestic instability had become a gateway for rapid global ascension, and as foreign competitors rose with confidence, Americans reconsidered what a pickup should genuinely represent in their daily lives. The Great Pickup Identity Reboot. Pride began to reemerge as Americans reclaimed the original identity of the pickup truck. For years, manufacturers had drifted toward luxury inflation, transfiguring work vehicles into rolling status symbols. Now, as affordability returned to the forefront, buyers gravitated toward trucks that matched their values rather than their aspirations. Communities celebrated simple, reliable designs that echoed earlier decades. Heated tailgates and holographic dashboards gave way to durable materials, practical storage, and straightforward controls. The pickup truck migrated back to its roots, serving as a tool rather than a trophy. Workers felt seen again, recognizing themselves in vehicles designed with their needs in mind. This cultural transformation did not occur slowly. It cascaded across social platforms, where buyers proudly showcased practical models without apology. Younger generations embraced the shift, finding pride not in extravagance, but in efficiency and authenticity. The reset represented more than budget consciousness. It was a declaration of identity. Manufacturers that failed to pivot toward this renewed ethos were left behind, while those who embraced the reboot saw loyalty ascend across regions and demographics. The pickup had been reclaimed from its bloated past, stripped of excess, and restored to the purpose that once defined it. It now stood as a symbol of resilience, practical pride, and authentic utility. This revival resonated with workers, families, and younger buyers seeking stability rather than spectacle, and with its identity fully restored and strengthened, the market prepared to enter a new hierarchy shaped directly, intentionally, and decisively by consumers themselves. A new hierarchy ascends. Resolve defined the final stage of the transformation as a new market hierarchy emerged. The once dominant automakers no longer dictated terms. Consumers did. Affordability-first strategies became the foundation of competitive success, compelling manufacturers to re-engineer their operations from top to bottom. Transparent pricing evolved into a baseline expectation. Companies that resisted found their relevance erode as buyers migrated toward brands that respected their intelligence. Foreign manufacturers continued their steady ascent, capitalizing on the consistency and value that domestic firms had neglected. The hierarchy hierarchy realigned around performance, practicality, and cost efficiency rather than prestige. Innovations cascaded across the industry. Modular platforms shortened production cycles, while flexible manufacturing allowed quicker pivots during volatile demand swings. Trucks increasingly became tools shaped by purpose rather than indulgence, stripped of unnecessary complexity, yet strengthened in core capability. Customers appreciated the clarity and honesty of the new order, recognizing that every design choice now served function first. In this transformed landscape, value, efficiency, and resilience replaced the excess that once defined the segment. For many buyers, confidence finally returned. By the time the transformation stabilized, the industry no longer resembled the one that existed at the beginning of the decade. It had ascended into a future defined by consumers, reinforced by global competition, and grounded in transparency. The pickup market had migrated through upheaval and emerged stronger, clearer, and more resilient than before. And with the new hierarchy in place, the story of the modern pickup entered a future shaped by those who demanded change. This reset is already underway, and the buyers who win will be the ones who see it early. If this changed how you think about truck prices or timing your next move, like the video so others see what's unfolding. Subscribe to stay ahead of what comes next, and comment below. Are you waiting, negotiating, or already seeing prices crack where you live?